This is the Dallas Morning News.
This episode is from an independent podcast hosted by the Dallas Morning News Opinion Team.
We had the mayor of Fort Worth, which was fun for me, having been on the other side of the Metroplex. Mattie Parker, though, is someone who is articulate. I've admired her for a long time, and I think she proved that today.
Yeah, she was excellent. Cowtown is the gateway to the West, as they like to call it, and Mayor Parker was just really broad on a lot of issues. We touched on a lot of stuff. Healthcare, infrastructure, economic development. We did local, regional, and national with her, and I think we hit on a lot of things.
I think you'll enjoy it.
Welcome to Intersections, where we take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom, tell us about our guest.
I will. It's somebody I admire, by the way. Mattie Parker is the mayor of Fort Worth, which just entered into the top 10 largest cities in the nation, has been involved in a variety of different political positions up to being elected mayor in 2021, in addition to that, being an attorney. So, Mattie, it's great having you with us.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you letting me drive over to Dallas to be with you.
We won't get into the Dallas versus Fort Worth.
No, it's all in good fun.
So, being mayor, what's the toughest part of the job?
I say this a lot. I think it's the schedule, the keeping up, feeling like you're stretched pretty thin, right? You've been through that. But at the same time, it also is kind of energizing that you know that you're kind of making a difference in that way. And then for me, I'm in that stage of life raising children. And so that the amount of information that is in my head, as I sit here and try to focus on this conversation between school pickups and what uniform this kid has a sleepover and where this backpack is, that's the reality of any working parent, right? And any working mom especially. And so that's probably the juggle, I guess is the best way to put it.
So tell us how you got here. You went to University of Texas. I think you went to now what is A&M Law School. You worked for Tom Craddock, then Kay Granger, kind of during law school as campaign manager. Tell us more about that journey and what you learned along the way.
Sure. Well, first of all, I grew up in a really small town in Central Texas. I had 42 kids in my graduating class. I think that's important context because this was not a life or an exposure that I had, especially growing up, right? And of course, going to UT Austin was an awesome opportunity for me, both in education, quality of education, but also in proximity to the state capitol and politics. And when I was a junior in college, I was bartending in a local restaurant, and a woman came in and sat in my section at the bar, and she was the new communications director for Speaker Craddock. And if you remember, he was the first Republican speaker since Reconstruction. So there'd been a lot of change and shift in Austin. And we struck a conversation, one thing led to another, and she gave me her card. And I was in the middle of, like any junior in college, okay, I got to figure out what I'm going to do when I graduate, get an internship. Yeah. And so I ended up taking a press assistant role in her office and worked that legislative session, which I guess would have been in 2005, and then really got the bug and loved the experience very much. And it was good working for Tom, and I think Speaker Craddock would agree to this. He doesn't love the media. And he was thrust in this role where the media was following him around all the time, and he had the gaggle of reporters. And even then, it was even more so because they had a full area where the media sat, and there was always that intimate relationship, kind of a press event every day. And so it was my responsibility to work with the comm staff, with his policy staff, with Tom, and then with media for a guy that was like, I'm just constantly annoyed. Why do they want to ask me these questions, right? And to me, it was so fun. And I was, 20, 21 years old. And to get my foot in the door that way was great.
Okay, so at that point, was that where you kind of said, hey, look, I would really like to kind of pursue the politics and the political life?
I knew I liked it, and I knew I was pretty good at it. And I had been offered amazing opportunities from the staff there.
What told you early on?
I have I think this is something that God gave me from a young age. I've always been an old soul, and I've always had a very high emotional intelligence and EQ. Read the room, read people, feed off of them, be able to react to that positively or negatively. And I realized that tool was so powerful in that setting. Because in politics and local government, federal government, doesn't matter what kind of level, the game of interaction with people is what it's all about. It's the whole game, right? And so, and then I obviously graduated from Texas and ended up taking a full-time job in the Capitol for Speaker Craddock. I was his executive assistant. So I was right outside of his office. I joked that I had the nicest office I'll ever have in my life, 21 or 22 when I graduated. But that was when they did the speaker overthrow happen. Do you remember that?
Absolutely.
And I'm witnessing all of that history literally in front of my desk, everybody screaming at each other.
From a personality that's
Oh
kind
my
of
gosh. Yeah. And it
in-
wasn't
in
just him,
Texas
by the way.
history.
It was also Lieutenant Governor at the time, Dewhurst, Rick Perry. And it was they all got along, right? But they also fought, and their staffs, all of it. So it was good exposure. Anyway, it got in my system. And then once I had worked a few sessions, my husband and I got married and we moved to Fort Worth. That's when I worked for Senator Phil King now, met Kay. There's a whole sequence of events there, right? But it really was for me just showing up, working really hard, and being indispensable to those around me.
in some of your most kind of key positions. You were in school at the time.
exactly.
Even Kay
Yeah.
Granger, you ran her campaign while you were in law
I was a
school.
glutton for punishment. Also, y'all can relate to this, I'm sure. Once you have your foot in the door in the workforce or in a profession that you enjoy, I was really afraid to walk away from that for 3 years for law school. And so we made the decision I would work full time and then go to law school at night. It was Texas Wesleyan University at the time. Now it's Texas A&M. And that worked for the first year. And then we decided, I just think we were young and dumb. Let's have a baby.
Why not?
Why not? And so my second year of law school, that 2L first semester, I was pregnant with Grayson, who's now almost 15. And I had a baby like 2 weeks before. I had to induce labor so that I could have him have a week off and then take finals. And I don't even know how I survived it, if I'm being honest. Great people. I have a great story about a professor that saved me completely. But I did go to school full time and work and juggle. And Kay was a great boss. When I took the bar exam, she gave me a full month off. She's like, just go focus.
I can imagine she
Yeah,
was.
she was so proud.
So I want to dive a little into this.
Yeah.
For the younger audience that's going to listen to this, just give a little bit of vision on working family life, how you juggle it all for maybe the young mothers and younger listeners out there.
Well, I'm curious. Each of you probably have experiences like this too. The number one thing I try to get across to people, and this is so true, you're not always going to be killing it in every aspect of your life. Very seldom does a day align and you're like, man, everything's aligned. Parenthood was working well, professional life, marriage, all of it. And you have to accept that, right? And when people use the word juggle, I try to say there are things you can drop and there are things you can't. And of course, it's your family and your children. They have to come first. But for our boys right now at their ages are 9 and 15, resiliency, being independent. I'm not a helicopter mom because I don't have time to be. So handle your business, right? And that is really important to me. I have an awesome partner to young people, especially if they're not married yet. Find somebody that loves you and loves what you want to do and supports you because it is a partnership for sure. And I have help. I have an amazing mom who's really lived with us since Grayson was born, kind of comes back and forth to the ranch. And then I have usually a bench of awesome TCU girls that help me get kids to and from. I'm really ready for a driver again. And you just have to accept that it's going to be a struggle some days. Absolutely.
You said one thing, though, then I'll push you on it because you said, family's always first.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly there's times when it isn't. When all of a sudden your job, with all the responsibilities that you've got, that has to take precedence. Now, maybe in the big scheme, understand that. But to your question, Kyle, at times, and be it in serving as mayor or in a business type of operation, there's times when that's what carries the day at that particular moment.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's also just a delineation of work structure where you know what's an emergency versus what's urgent. And when the emergency is work, is being the leader of our city, that's where my focus, my presence is needed versus what is urgent. And that's a hard delineation. I think you only gain an understanding of that over years of experience, right?
Yeah.
And then also just that trust within our own family and with my friends, like that sense of protectiveness and structure is there so that you can ebb and flow.
Yeah.
And that's in any career.
I ask that because I hear the question so many, and I've answered it in the same way that you have. But the reality of it is, it's not always black and white.
It's not
There
linear.
are times when it goes back and forth and it shifts.
Yeah.
That doesn't change your overall priorities.
Right.
But at a given moment, it doesn't mean that your decision is always the same.
That's very astute. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's jump in a little bit into mayor and your role as of 2021. I think you were chief of staff for Mayor Betsy Price, who preceded you, and then got her endorsement.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the last 4 years and what you've learned.
And when did you decide? So you come on as chief of staff to Mayor Price, very well thought of, popular mayor. So when did you kind of say, hey, look, that position looks pretty attractive to me?
Not while I was there. Yeah, I left. So I, in long planned before COVID hit, I had been asked to stand up a nonprofit called T3 Partnership, which is still running today, and working with Rainwater Charitable Foundation. And so I prepared to leave the office. I actually extended my time because COVID started, and so it wasn't until late spring that I fully left. And we started T3, and that was my focus. And that's what I was doing in 2020 and then moving into 2021. And I was actually from behind the scenes advising a few people that were considering running for mayor on policy issues they weren't familiar with. Like, this is the things we worked on. This is what worked, what didn't work. Because that's always been my role behind the scenes. And that was what I was prepared for. But then right as that turn of the year came, January 2021, the slate of candidates sort of started to shift and actually grow. And by that point, it was like 9 or 10 people. And it was also, unsurprisingly, looking very partisan, right? You had folks that really, from a more far-right angle, you had people on the left.
Because you had the Democratic
Party chair. Yes.
Party chair
She was
kind
running.
of the prime opposition when you finally got into it.
And so that's all playing out. Still, no one knows who the kind of the other front runner is going to be, who people are going to support. It was very uncertain. Then you had January 6th happen. So the country was incredibly unsettled and divided. And despite the fact that I was in the conversations, people talking about who else should consider running, it was never my idea to run. And then suddenly a few people, many that you probably would know, started calling me and saying, we think that you're actually the person that should be considered doing this. So it was by accident. I knew enough, back to your original question when I was in office, I knew the sacrifice, I knew the difference, right? I've always enjoyed being behind the scenes. I'm actually much more of an introvert than people probably realize. And I was never really willing or wanted to go that direction. But when the time came to make the decision and it was my city at stake, I sort of mustered the strength and prayed through it as a family and said, okay, here we go. And we played to win and we were successful.
That's great.
And the dynamics of that election. So there's a number of Republicans that actually talked about being Republican. We talked about the Democratic committee, county chair doing it. You took the position for the most part that it was nonpartisan. And I make the argument that that's kind of the issue at the local level, is people are more concerned about police, fire, garbage being picked up, streets, those sorts of things, regardless of any kind of ideological label that's attached to them. So you played that all the way down, came in third, or came in second actually, in the initial reaction, in the initial, and your opposition, she actually won. But then when you came back, you really pulled together kind of what we'll call the right or the Republican side. So it became a little bit partisan, although you still pushed on the nonpartisan, really kind of pushed back on that Republican label. Fair?
Yeah, and I've still attempted to do that after the last 4 years through that time period. Some days it's easier than others, of course. Look, I have been a Republican my whole career, a conservative. I've worked for some great conservative members. I've candidly, in my time around politics, though, I've never seen it the way it is now, where the division line is so stark. But I strongly believe that 80 to 90% of the country, 80-90% of Fort Worth is somewhere in this middle. They lean conservative, they lean more liberal. But to your point, they want their streetlights fixed. They want us to focus on the right kind of homeless services. They want us to have police officers and firefighters. They want a beautiful city that's a high quality of life. And if you're constantly talking about your liberal progressive values or your really conservative stripes, you lose sight of what really matters in city government.
So how have we gotten to that point, though, Mattie? We've gotten to a point, and take your numbers, 80-90%, but at least a big chunk in the middle there. But that's not what is either the focus of politics today or the result of government today, which is probably a distinction. It is, as you said, very toxic. It's kind of black and white, we, they, et cetera. How did we get in that position? And then even probably more difficult question to answer is, how do we get out of it?
Yeah. Well, those are all good questions. If I had the answers, right, maybe I wouldn't be sitting here with y'all talking about this. I do think a lot of us in leaders' positions, the people that I respect and work with that are on both sides of the aisle, we're all talking about this because the temperature has to come down. And, my own family has been threatened directly. I mean, it's now to the level of violence being acceptable, right? It's incredibly scary. I mean, think about the last year and a half of assassinations and attempts on individuals' lives at a elected level. And I do believe it actually impacts local government even more so So the responsibility lies really with national parties and that system that we have in the country. But because we are so close to individual people and the structure of our governance and the way we interact at the city council level, we're the ones getting pummeled with all of that continually. And it's a giant distraction. I'm reading a book right now. I've really finished it. It's written by a city manager from Ferris, named Brooks Williams, and it's called Performative Outrage. Every single piece of that book is poignant, and it is performance. There's a business behind the outrage. And some of it's at, large cable news networks, and some of it's at an individual YouTube influencer level. But those of us in leadership have got to speak truth to power and stand up. Enough is enough, because it cannot take over the way we govern our cities. I mean, it would be so detrimental to the city of Fort Worth to lose sight of what has made us an amazing city, right? That you mentioned at the top of our discussion, 10th largest city in the country, over 1 million people, right? That's not by mistake. That's by leadership and careful consideration and public service that have led our city into this direction. And I don't mean that just from elected individuals. I mean that from business leaders, civic leaders, school leaders, PTA moms, all of it. It all matters. But to how do you get out of it? I think we have to keep talking about it. You have to refuse to accept that that's our reality now moving forward. The other asterisk, though, is social media. And I'm sure that that's something y'all have seen as well that has just put gasoline on the fire. And what is acceptable for people to put online is amazing to me.
But you've got responsibilities for running a city. Other major cities are in the same position.
Yeah.
Those cities, or a lot of them will say, have taken the position that we are going to take those ideological positions, that we'll stand on issues that have nothing to do with the city, nothing to do with the type of functions that you talked about a moment ago. Why do you think those cities have been pulled into battles ideological that have nothing to do with what they are responsible for doing? And importantly, and I think you touched on a moment ago, make it more difficult for them to achieve those objectives?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think, first of all, you probably ran for the wrong office. If you're a mayor in this country that's set on being a really strong Democrat or a really strong Republican, just go run for Congress, right? You'll fit in just fine if that's what you want to go do. But the mayors that I admire, the people I enjoy working for, are also the cities that are being successful, that you see moving the needle. People like Mayor David Holt in Oklahoma City. People like Mayor Jane Castor in Tampa, who was the chief of police, by the way, before she became the mayor. We're on different parties, but we align greatly on the priorities that matter to our cities. And look around, our cities are thriving, right? And the reality is, too, we have to be consensus builders as mayor. Compromise is the only way forward. I think in Washington, we're seeing it right now with the shutdown. It no longer is rewarded. Let's move to our corners. I can't do that at a city level. I have to have a coalition of people.
You've got to solve problems.
Yeah, you know this.
And you're out there. But you almost have to ask the other side. You gave some great examples of cities that are doing some great things. But most of the cities from a population standpoint, St. Louis, Detroit, New York, Washington, Los Angeles, they're all going the other way. Those cities are failing to perform. Their population's going down, economic viability is going down, companies moving away, all those sorts of things. I almost ask the question, and this has been the case for decades, why does that leadership continue to be reelected?
Yeah. Well, I think it also is motivating the silent majority. And the silent majority exists in every single city. And there will be a tipping point in those communities of enough is enough, right? It was interesting. I think it was summer before last, I went to Detroit for a Mayor's Institute. And Mayor Dugan, of course, of Detroit was there. He's been mayor for quite some time now. And it was fascinating to hear his stories and tour the city with him. And his problems are so different than Fort Worth, because of a city that has drastically reduced in population, sitting just over 600,000, a city that was built for 1.6 million. And he knows what it's like to get in the trenches and fight to bring your city back to life, right? And bring businesses back to the table. But unfortunately, there are plenty of cities, Tom, that will never readjust. The ideological battles will be so alluring to them. They'll want to be a part of that fury that they'll never be able to come back from it unless some leader comes along that is able to motivate a majority of their residents to think differently about government.
Let's turn to the fun part, Fort Worth. Okay. But all right, I had the same type of conversation when I was mayor. I had a call from a gentleman in Detroit who had just become mayor. The previous mayor was thrown in federal prison. And was mayor, and he wanted to come and have dinner and visit. I said, sure, I'd be happy to. His name was Dave Bing. probably better known for his basketball days than being mayor. And it was a fascinating conversation because much like you, all the things that I dealt with on a day-to-day basis were fundamentally based on growth. All the issues that come with growth, some real challenges that. His were exactly the opposite, is how do I wind down from a city that was 2 million to 700,000, looking at 500,000. And it was a stark contrast to think about the differences in the cities. And it really puts all of us here in Texas in a very different position. Talk about Fort Worth. A lot of good things happening.
Yeah, there are really. And one thing I'll mention as a segue, specific to why I think we're successful in Fort Worth, is in Texas is lucky, so pay attention to this. All of our large cities, with the exception of Houston, are council manager, mayor's, council form of government. And when you have a balance, and we have that in Fort Worth, which is why the conversation about why are we successful, how is it going, is so powerful. We have an amazing city management team led by Jay Chapa. They're professionals that have trained to do this job for 20 and 30 years. We are the board of a major corporation. I am the chair of the board. Yes, we set policy and hold people accountable, but you also let the professionals do their jobs that have built a career around running a city and running it well. And we should be really proud of that in Texas. I think it has helped elevate us. So to your question on these other cities, most of them, if not all of them, are strong mayor cities where they're fed by the ideology. And sadly, you end up with mayors and council members that have no idea how to run a city. And yet they bring people in, they with a broad swath. They take everybody out, put my people in. And as a juxtaposition in Fort Worth, every single position we have top-notch talent, right? So for Fort Worth, why we're successful, I think this is the best illustration. It seems to translate well in Fort Worth when I talk to people. People vote with their feet. And especially post-COVID, families across this country reevaluated everything. Businesses reevaluated. Where do I want to be? Where am I? Where can I thrive? Where's my family safe? And we've seen a boom in population even before COVID, but since then, right? It's one of the fastest growing large cities in the country. We're now bigger than the city of Austin, right? The fourth largest city in Texas. But we're also a part of Dallas-Fort Worth Metro. And I know we love to joke about the feud between Dallas and Fort Worth, but the reality is in North Texas, we want all of our cities to be successful. Over 8 million people, this metro region is a driving force in the economy, not just for Texas, not just the United States, but the entire world now. Home to DFW International Airport, third busiest airport in the world. And so for Fort Worth, the most important thing we can do is keep doing what is working, except when we need to pivot, have really smart policies. Being fiscally conservative on the government side at a city government level is just really smart. How lean can you be, but also provide excellent city services? Where do you need to partner with private sector to be better? One great example for us is in trash collection with waste management, right? Not a sexy topic. We have one of the largest contracts with a private entity in the country. It works really well. Right. And we hold them accountable when we need to shift, right? Public safety. I mean, we just attracted one of the best chiefs in the country. Thank you, Dallas, for letting, he departed Dallas, thought he went out of the uniform. He wanted to come back. We're happy to have him. But he's leading one of the very best police departments in the entire country. And that translates into, okay, I feel safe. The city's run well. The streets are clean. Now I want to, capital investment in my business. I want to grow my family. Those types of things that really matter.
So here's one for you.
Yeah.
The mayor mentioned it. In the Dallas area, Dallas-Fort Worth area, 7 of the 100 largest cities in the nation are in that metropolitan area. 7 of the 100 largest ones.
Yeah, it is.
I want to do a look back and a look forward. So look back. Talk to us about how your leadership style has had to evolve as you've gotten in the office and been there 4 years. Obviously, you mentioned all the things that are going right in Fort Worth. And then take us forward. What does the next 4 years of Fort Worth look like?
So you learn a lot about leadership, especially in that first year of office. You're just trying to get your feet wet. You're trying to think about your priorities, what they're going to be, how to focus, create kind of pillars of your administration. You got staff, all those things. You also have to learn where your political capital is needed most and when and how to ask for help or partnership. And for me as mayor, the things that I did in those first 2 years have proved to be really helpful. Initiatives that I've started that are now have great foundation and that will continue well after being mayor. That was very important to me. So I had to ask the question early on, how do I achieve that? And I think we'll achieve it by private sector partnership, whether it's with philanthropy or business. And those are everything from our education work, maternal health and infant mortality work, Good Nature, our focus on parks and open space. None of that is happening in a silo at City Hall. I've got now tentacles out in the community in partnership to help champion that. And that's an advantage I had having worked for multiple people and seeing, okay, we start something and the next person comes in and they change it, right? And it's just like playing whack-a-mole on big issues that really the community should care about.
So what are those major issues?
Yeah, so I'll take education first, and it's really time-sensitive topic because of the conversation around Fort Worth ISD. Mm-hmm. I've spent probably 15 years interested in and then more involved in education policy and education transformation, specifically in Tarrant County. And Dallas is an interesting test case because Dallas ISD has gone through such a transformation as well. For Fort Worth, though, we've just lagged behind. And Fort Worth ISD is our largest district of 12 in the city. And I'll focus on it for a minute because a year ago, almost exactly, I made the decision to go to the school board in a public setting alongside community leaders to say enough's enough. The infighting between the board and the superintendent is not sustainable. Our children can't read. It's just that simple. And we will not continue to grow and thrive and be successful as a city.
Absolutely.
And so education has been a huge pillar. We have a Mayor's Council on Education and Workforce, which is really focused on that pathway to college, career, military success, which is something we started with T3. There's so much work going on there in partnership with industry. Obviously, this connection with now and focus on literacy in the city of Fort Worth and the connection of a transformational school district. We have a great superintendent right now who's now been in place for about a year. But that looming question from Commissioner Morath as to what takeover looks like for Fort Worth ISD, the same thing that they went through in Houston.
Yeah, but let's go a little bit deeper on that. Dallas schools are not particularly strong. There are a couple of schools that are well viewed, but if you look at the population, well under 50% of the students are below grade level. Mm-hmm. Fort Worth is about 10 points below that.
Yeah.
And they're in terrible shape. How did we get our public schools in such a position that well over 50, in the case of Fort Worth, well over 60% of the students that go through there are failing?
Yeah. I think it's adult accountability, right? It's an acceptance and a transparency that what we've been doing is not working. And it's actually much more complicated than that. When you really dig in and understand the shift around the focus on phonics and literacy and what worked in classrooms, and then when you get into really large districts, why are they failing? A weird acceptance that we created specifically in Texas and really across the country of that if you're a poor kid, you can't read, you can't be successful. We know that's false. I just attended an awesome session yesterday with Fort Worth Education Partnership, and one of the entire sessions was about bright spot schools that have over 96% of their students that are economically disadvantaged, and yet 70+% of them are reading at grade level and still soaring. So first is transparency, accept we have a problem. And honestly, Texas, we have a lot, there's so much noise around education, but if you look at the bills that have been passed in the last few sessions, especially around some of these issues, it actually is moving us in the right direction. It's incentivizing schools such as the college career military readiness, they call it CCMR, which sounds so simple. Yeah, kids should be college career military ready. Well, we weren't, but for a very long time. Now we've incentivized districts to draw down those money. That's just one example of many. I think a respect and investment in educators. We have a very high percentage of educators that are alternatively certified. Rather than going through robust programming in an education school setting in college. You also have resource depletion in certain areas. You have to accept in Fort Worth ISD specifically, such as our Leadership Academy networks, which is an 1882 partnership with Texas Wesleyan University. Those schools are more successful with students, but they have more services, right?
But a lot of those things we could have talked about and said 10 years or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We put a lot more money in the public schools. The legislature, both in Texas and other places, have addressed the issue, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. We seem to pat ourselves on the back when we get a 2 or 3 point improvement, but that still means 2/3 of the kids are failing.
Yeah.
What's amazing to me, Mayor, is people, and clearly you are, but most of the population and most of the elected population really don't care. I mean, pat themselves on the back, as I said, for the 2 or 3. But we're no better off than we were 10 or 20 years ago, and the reality is we're worse off.
Well, and yes,
we just haven't made progress.
But
It's all kind of incremental, but not quantum.
The other problem is those people in positions of influence on both sides of the aisle for decades, those weren't their kids that weren't succeeding. They were other people's kids. Yeah. And then finally it's caught up with sort of like, oh, now I can't hire people, right? Because you can't export that poverty that lives in your cities. And we now have so much better data and collective impact organizations that are refocusing, organizations like Texas 2036 that are lifting up these issues. We have nonprofits and collective impact organizations in Fort Worth. You'll have Commit in Dallas, examples across the country. That is really powerful accountability on the outside to push. You now have a refocus on governance and how important, we talked about city councils, how important that is. So
I want to go into economic development just for a second. So Fort Worth obviously growing in an incredible way. You've got Sundance Square and you've got an Auberge Hotel and you've got the new Crescent office development, that hotel area that's over on kind of the west side of downtown.
He's looking for a job in economics.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
Hey,
I know.
it is
Come
what
on
it is.
over.
I'll leave Dallas just for you.
Okay, good.
What have been the incentives to get people to Fort Worth? Talk us through like how you've tried to map out making sure that corporations feel welcome and also that the people have the ability to not just work there, but live there and enjoy the city.
Well, first we had to do an evaluation of why we weren't leading, especially on economic development and corporate relocations, business development. And one big issue we had when I first took office is we didn't have a robust economic development entity that was just focused on attracting businesses. And we were very lucky. I worked alongside Mike Berry and Marianne Ald and a few others to answer these questions. And we went after what we thought was one of the top talented individuals in the state, which was Robert Allen. And Robert, at the time, was running this Texas EDP entity for Governor Abbott, had worked for Governor Abbott for 20 years. And, I went to Robert and his wife, Rachel, and said, how do you feel about Fort Worth, right? And it took time, but we attracted him and his acumen to Fort Worth and built a economic development partnership organization that's fully funded on the private sector side with a really robust board, everyone from the CEO of American Airlines, Robert Isom, to David Endicott, Alcon, and others around this table so that you could tell the story for Fort Worth, so that, how powerful it is to have a business leader come and sit in a room with someone like Katie Farmer at BNSF. Like, okay, why are they successful? Why are they choosing to reinvest here? Why do you have 5 Berkshire Hathaway companies in Fort Worth, right?
Okay, so we've got a lot of growth.
Yeah.
But Fort Worth has historically been known as a West Texas kind of city. It's the gateway to the West. I think that's its moniker.
Yeah.
How do you keep that small town feel for the residents that, frankly, don't want to live in Dallas for all the corporate reasons, but want that small town feel of Fort Worth?
It's a balance, right? And it's funny because that's sometimes the most prevalent question I get from folks that have lived in Fort Worth a long time. I want it to stay like a small town. But even now, even as mayor, it still feels that way, right? And I think some of it is investment in neighborhoods and different areas across the city that feel distinct. You can choose to live or have your corporate headquarters in very different areas of the city, from the Cultural District to near South Side to Stop 6, all of those areas, you get to choose where you want to be, and yet that whole community feels individual to you. And that is not by mistake. That's a tremendous amount of investment the city has made, and then we've now gone further and have neighborhood improvement programs to also enhance that. So it all goes hand in hand for sure. But it's the charm of Fort Worth. And if you haven't seen it, I've talked about it a lot lately, but from the mid-'70s, it's the original Unexpected City promo video about Fort Worth that Jimmy Stewart was the narrator for. And it's 15 minutes. It's easy to watch. And if you go back and see that perspective, that feeling about how special Fort Worth is and the unique culture and heritage of our community still exists today. And we're still really proud of it. I'll close by this. The best thing you can do to close a deal in Fort Worth is bring them to one of the last 2 nights, the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo. And I've never seen people from New York to LA more excited to wear a cowboy hat, right, and bet on bulls and think, this place is different, right? And so that Cowboys and culture piece is still alive and well and something we want to hold on to.
Been there for the last 2 nights.
It's pretty fun,
good.
right? It's good. Yeah.
It's good. So clearly the leader of Fort Worth. But as we talked about earlier, the region has a lot of cities, a lot of population. There's no city. Dallas is the largest, but it does not dominate in terms of population, majority of the population. Fort Worth is large, but it's still a fraction of the total population. You're also a leader of the region. And most companies make the decision not to go to Fort Worth or Irving or anything. They make the decision to come to the region.
Yes.
Then they'll kind of figure out, okay, what makes sense within that context. So how do you put yourself in a position of representing the interests of Fort Worth, but also understanding that you're a leader in a region that I argue is the most successful in the nation and has really become the center of the U.S. economy?
It's almost like knowing which jersey to wear on which day. Am I all the way Fort Worth today or am I all the way North Texas?
Sure.
The same is true right now as we get ready for the World Cup in 2026. I'm wearing the DFW region jersey, right? To have the World Cup come to the Fort Worth, Dallas metro region is a pretty exciting thing. But we all need to be pushing on that, right? And excited and prepared and have all these agencies working together to make it happen. And the games being in Arlington, that's just one example. There are plenty of times where I am all the way Fort Worth. And a great example of that lately has been our success around film why I lobbied in Austin so hard for film incentives to be enhanced in the state of Texas, the power of that for our own city. Obviously, Taylor Sheridan being from Fort Worth 101 Studios, his brand new studio, which is now the largest in the state of Texas in partnership with the Perot's in Hillwood. That's not by mistake. We wore the Fort Worth jersey there. We wanted to tell that story and do it well and create an infrastructure in Fort Worth that has really incentivized all types of productions to be in our city, which has been good.
With all the good things in Fort Worth, you still got the challenge of any major city.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about those. So crime, public safety. Everybody's concerned about that.
Yeah.
You mentioned you just recruited a new police chief who was very well thought of. I knew him very well on this side of the track, so to speak. How do you approach public safety? How much time do you spend on it? And kind of where do you think Fort Worth is falling on a kind of relative national?
Well, we are still remain one of the safest large cities in the country. And we're really proud of that, but it takes a tremendous amount of vigilance and focus. Remember when I was elected right on the heels of 2020, and our chief at the time, Chief Neil Noakes, and I had been friends for years, and he had just been appointed chief probably 6 months before that. And we sat down and really talked about how I specifically could support him and his department. And I ran on that really as a big issue in the campaign because I was deeply concerned with what I'd seen trends in across the country. And being unapologetic, right? You can back the blue 100%, but you can also demand accountability.
Absolutely.
You can also say things need to look different in policing. Our department needs more resources, more training, more support to meet the needs of community. Really lean into community policing and neighborhood police officers, which we have done. And as a result, we remain one of the safest cities. You cannot be a safe city if your city doesn't respect the police department, if they don't appreciate the heroism there, right? But it's not just the department. It's also fire department. It's also code officers. It's the way we take care of streets. The broken window theory, as you well know, is very real. The way we invest in communities. Yes.
It works.
And so our city manager right now is actually putting together a great new team around code, to strike team that really are focused on nuisance abatement because it all permeates through those areas. So that's first and foremost. The second piece around public safety is coming alongside community that's individual, block by block, and that's where those neighborhood police officers are so powerful. Individual council members have perspectives around this. We're also really thankful for outside organizations that support the department. We've been working now for a few years with ACT, Reed Porter's organization that was founded here in Dallas.
There.
Okay, he's amazing, right? And so drawing their partnership to Fort Worth and having additional resources. So we're on the right track. It's also about being fully staffed in our department, making sure you have enough officers across the city. And we are on track to be fully staffed by 2026.
That's great.
I don't think another large city in the country.
How do you measure that?
You measure it by how many, rank and file officers you have that are currently on staff and working, how many classes you have in place.
No, but relative to population, relative to geography.
Depends on who you ask.
How do you as mayor think about what my fully staffed police department should be?
I don't come up with the idea. I say to my chief, do you think this many officers? Is 1,800 what you need? Mm-hmm. Yes or no? If the answer is no, then we have to go back to management and say this is not enough. Yeah. My chief is telling me this is not enough to get the job done. The worst type of mayor is the one who's never been in law enforcement and pulls a number out of the air because it felt good to see on CNN and then tries to sell that as public safety. No, I don't wear a badge. And for Chief Garcia's been doing this for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And he's getting a feel for it right now. And I have no idea. He may come to us next budget and say, hey, I want to adjust some numbers. I want to add a lateral class or whatever it may be. But we have to, that's why you hire experts and professionals in those roles. It's how any good CEO runs a business, right? You can't micromanage. And I'll continue to have that mentality, especially around public safety.
So you're in a good position.
Yes.
But the administration and the president have recently pushed hard on cities that he would view are not safe cities. Mm-hmm. Clearly, Washington, D.C. was the start, but Chicago's been part of the conversation, Memphis, and that sort of thing. As a mayor, how do you look at that? Mm-hmm. The idea that the president says, I judge the city's not safe, so I'm going to send in National Guard troops. Yeah.
Well, first, this conversation around which cities were safe and not safe started well before President Trump was back in office. I had this conversation a lot among other mayors and other leaders across the country. I mean, I visited some of those cities. And I visited Portland, I guess it was 2023, and it almost brought me to tears. Their downtown was completely decimated. The very first person I interacted with was a guy selling heroin out of a backpack, and I had just getting my bags out of the back of my car. There are cities in this country that are not safe. the question you're really asking is, what role does a president or federal government play in keeping a community safe?
Yep.
Right now for Fort Worth, we are taking care of business. We have an awesome chief and a city that supports them. We work really closely with our state agencies between DPS. We have fantastic relationships with FBI and Homeland Security. That matters because it's keeping our region safe. So if and when President Trump or anybody in the administration said to Fort Worth, probably saying to Chief Garcia, hey, I'm concerned, this is what we're seeing, the first thing I would do is consult with Chief and other chiefs in the region and say, okay, these are the things they're concerned about. Do we agree? Or do we think that they're off base and we need to demonstrate that with facts? And let's sit down and have a conversation. I'm not the kind of mayor that's going to get in front of a microphone on television and scream and yell and have a press conference about how backwards the administration is. That's just not a battle I want to try to get into. And so I'm confident right now Fort Worth's in a great place. Our numbers look completely different than some of these other large cities.
But you're involved in U.S. Conference of
Absolutely.
Mayors.
Yeah.
You're a leading mayor. Again,
yes.
One of the 10 largest cities. Is the federal government taking a good policy approach by putting National Guard troops and going into cities?
Well, I haven't visited those cities that have had National Guard. I haven't been to D.C. since National Guard was there. I haven't been in Los Angeles. You watch the news, and depending on which news channel you watch, Tom, you get a very different opinion.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Is that
right?
how that works?
And so I candidly, I hesitate to tell you because I haven't been on the ground. I haven't walked the streets of a city like Los Angeles and felt it. I've heard Mayor Bass's opinion very clearly that she doesn't think it was right for her city. But I only know how to govern my city and see what my department would need. And candidly, when let's take an emergency disaster, for example, right? When you have a hurricane hit the coast and everybody's all hands on deck and National Guard is deployed and everybody kind of knows their roles. I've seen the National Guard in action at Wilkerson Grinds when we were activated to take in victims of the hurricanes. So I reserve hope that if and when that were to happen in Fort Worth, the leadership of our city, not just myself, would be at the table to say, okay, let's create a dialogue here that works for our city to keep people safe and calm and not create hysteria, because that's really detrimental to my residents. And that's who I answer to. And that's who I'm concerned about. Right. And again, it's also hard because the politics of Washington are so different and the way they communicate and work with people is so different that in Fort Worth, it just feels like a different world. And so, we had prepared for that, I guess, is the best way to tell you, too.
Strong now, and y'all are doing, obviously, a very good job, and you're growing in an incredible, precipitous way. Metropolitan cities have not done that in America the last, call it, 2 decades. I mean, there's some significant issues that take place in large metropolitan areas. How do you keep Fort Worth out of the spotlight and out of the news and keep it strong, growing, vibrant, and economically friendly?
Well, you are not a performance artist. I know it does matter who's mayor. And, I watched Mayor Price do the same thing. Be really, really intentional with your words and your actions. Stand up when you need to. Have a backbone. Never lose your sense of integrity and ideals. But not everything has to be a performance. And that has been really important for Fort Worth. And frankly, that's sort of, that's where our leaders have always been. If you think back from Mayor Bob Bolin, Mayor of Fort Worth, Mayor Kay Granger, Mayor Moncrief, Mayor Barr, Mayor Price, all of them, yes, unique personalities, but they're just there to be servants for the city and then pass the torch. I hope that's what people will say about me as well, right? It worries me a lot that now in politics, it's always about climbing the ladder and the next thing, and with no focus on how hard, this, Mayor Leppert, to be a mayor is really time consuming, and you have to be focused on it, or you're not good at it. And people lose faith in you, right? And lose trust. So to answer your question directly, it is building and maintaining that sense of trust, pivoting when you need to, responding to city needs from infrastructure and streets to parks to public safety, and also being, a great communicator, which is unique for cities. Local government really does struggle in how to get their message out. And so we've had to pivot up on that too, is we can do all these great things, but if our residents don't know about it, and they're not watching on Facebook, which is usually where they get it, right? Then we have to pivot to really meet them where they are.
One of the issues you do have to deal with, though, that is coming straight on your shoulders is the infrastructure. You've got a city that's growing very rapidly, a region that's growing very, very rapidly. Talk a little bit about the thoughts on your major initiatives on the infrastructure side, and just the ability of this region to continue to keep pace. We're bringing about 150,000 new people into the region, space of pick your number 4 or 5 years. We will go from the 4th largest region to the 3rd largest region.
Passing Chicago.
First time that's ever happened since 1960, a shift there. This region, if you go back to 1985, was 12th. So we've gone from 12th to 4th and we'll be 3rd. That puts a lot of pressure on.
Yeah.
What are you doing on infrastructure? And importantly, what could go wrong with all this?
So first, at a city level, it's back to that great people in the right places. We have a fantastic department heads from development services to our transportation public works departments, our water director. It's exactly who you would want to be running those departments that are focused not just today, but on the needs 10, 20 years from now and trying to keep pace and create better policy proposals for council to grapple with. And then you have regional partnership. We have one of the very best MPOs in the entire country with North Central Texas Council of Governments. And Michael Morris is a transportation guru expert that we've all worked with. And almost 99% of the projects in Fort Worth and Tarrant County, it's absolutely money trees grow plentiful, right? And he understands the criticality of the things that we're doing here in the region and how to pull down and leverage those funds from the state and from the federal level. Just recently, for instance, we lost Amtrak funding, which is that Heartland Flyer from Oklahoma City to Fort Worth. And we pivoted and Michael figured it out. We've got it funded for a year. We're going to have to reevaluate a year from now. But in any other region or city, we would have just said, okay, we got to close it. We don't have the money. It's just one example. Infrastructure is a multitude of things, as you both know. It's the things you can't see. It's replacement of cast iron pipes under the ground, right? It's the right water lines to major development projects. It's holding developers accountable with impact fees to make sure they're paying their fair share. It's growth in east-west corridors for Fort Worth to connect you to I-35 or I-30. It's painful right now in Fort Worth because if you go west on 30 into 20 out towards Parker County and Aledo area, they've got a major construction project with TxDOT, but it's under construction, well underway. I mean, think about the accomplishments of 35 going north. 35 had 3 sections and huge partnership from Hillwood, specifically Russell Laughlin at the time, who helped build that highway, and 114. That takes a tremendous amount of focus and pushing on government as well. Really good coordination. Doesn't sound exciting, but when we do bond elections on transportation projects, we coordinate with Tarrant County. How smart is that? To say, okay, what are you going to spend? What are we going to spend? Let's leverage that. And that's at the staff level, right? All of that really tells the story. One thing I think we're struggling with right now, though, as a region is around transit and what the future of that looks like. I mean, gosh, the fighting with DART is really difficult for all these member cities, and they all have a good point. They want their fair share of allocation for their sales tax dollars because there's a limited amount to go around. We have 3 transit authorities in North Texas. We have Trinity Metro. They've tried some new innovative things, which we're really proud of. They have half a penny of our sales tax. The other half penny goes to CCPD, which I think has worked tremendously for us in Fort Worth around public safety. We're trying to extend TexRail, which right now is from downtown to the airport, and then extend it into the medical district. We did an urban rail study out of my office over the last year to kind of look at what new streetcar opportunities would be or other light rail opportunities within the city. These are big, expensive projects. So what would hold you back is if there are the continued bureaucracy and confusion at a federal and state level around some of these big projects can be difficult. Right now, we have an excellent district engineer for the Fort Worth District. David Salazar does a wonderful job coordinating with all these people, keeping the relationship with the commissioners, transportation committee members, making sure Fort Worth specifically, in what's going to be the 3rd largest region in the country, gets our fair share is very important. But then we still, back to that transit piece, we're kind of confused about that. We now have over 8 million people. We're going to go to 9, 10, 11. We have to have a transit solution. I've attempted to speak to this as a glass half full.
Can it be done with 3 separate transit agencies?
I think long term, and Michael Morris, if you were here, would tell you we need one. But the politics of that right now are really complicated. And but we should be glass half full about this because we're not saddled with legacy large subway systems, let's say like New York, that have huge infrastructure needs, billions and billions of dollars to rebuild. We can start with what the latest technology and innovations look like in transit. The flying cars of the Jetsons are here, right? And air taxi travel across DFW will happen. Yeah. And so how do we lean into that on the public sector side? I think is an open question we still all have.
You've touched on a lot, kind of the ecosystem of local, state, and then federal government. Clearly, the state Texas has articulated that states' rights, federal government leave us alone, et cetera. But on the city level, you've seen much more of an incursion of the state into the cities, talking about limiting taxing authority, even how you interpret laws, those sorts of things, which laws trump, et cetera, those sorts of things. How do you look at kind of this relationship between the state and the state pushing in and really trying to govern more and more or have a hand in the government of cities?
Well, first of all, having now experienced it both as mayor for 2 sessions and even before that with Mayor Price, we're obviously not going to change their minds around what's best for cities and local control as an issue. Those battle lines are drawn. And so what I have seen works best for our city in particular is to tell the Fort Worth story. How are we managed differently? What relationships do I have personally that I can leverage to make sure they understand those permitting issues you're screaming about that might be in Austin or Houston or Dallas? They don't exist here. Let me tell you how we do things in Fort Worth, right? Let us bring people to the table, really partnering with private sector. Like our real estate council was indispensable this last session to tell that story for Fort Worth because we are very individual. The struggles most recently have been around, well, I'll take 2, obviously taxation, property taxes. And I get it. Across Texas, everyone screams about our property taxes, but we don't have an income tax, and your cities don't receive money from the state government. We have income tax, we have property taxes and sales taxes. And by the way, the state keeps a large sum of sales tax and back to the state coffers, right? And so 1/3 of your tax bill in Fort Worth goes to City of Fort Worth taxes. And we have done our dead level best to live within those revenue cap means. They left it at 3.5. We'll keep pursuing that. We'll see what they try to do next session. We advocated hard during special session of the detriment they were trying to create around revenue caps and why. But it's not because we don't believe in lower taxes at all. It's just we have to provide the level of quality services that our residents are demanding, and it's expensive. You know, the largest part of your budget is all to public safety, police and firefighters. And thank goodness, most people, Democrat and Republican, they all still like, especially firefighters. Police officers hate that. Firefighters get all the love. So we sometimes stick them out there in front, put them in a uniform, and that seems to go well. But I don't know how to demystify that because it's been so difficult. And obviously then you've got half the bill as property taxes around schools, which continues to be volleyed back and forth. The other issue that I'm hopeful on, and maybe I can come back to you in a year and we've made some progress, is I would love for us to create a council of local government leaders, industry experts, and legislators around housing in Texas. And let's approach this together rather than opposition because it's incredibly complex. I was with Kirk Watson in Austin at the LBJ School, the Civitas Institute, and they had several speakers there that are housing experts. And she's the lead attorney for land use in California for Holland & Knight, brilliant attorney. And to hear her talk about California policies is you can't stop but laugh.
Yeah.
But,
it's crazy.
But we need to be listening to people like that and help them shape our policies. And it won't happen.
Because at one time they had the same policies that we
and then they moved.
Exactly. Yeah. And so but we can't do that in a quick session where, committee hearings are at midnight. We need to be working on this now in the interim. And so I talked to Mayor Watson about this, like how do we create that? So stay tuned. We'll see if maybe we can make some progress to have a real good dialogue around housing.
We've done infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
We've done economic development. We've done education. Fort Worth is also growing just from a people perspective.
Yes.
And the politics of Tarrant County are still the politics of Tarrant County.
Mm-hmm.
You ran as a Republican.
Yeah.
You ran against the Democratic council or Democratic Party chair of the county. Is Tarrant County changing?
Sure.
Is it going to go blue?
Well, I think the reality is Fort Worth specifically, which I'll speak to first, has been purple for a long time, which I think is healthy. And that's really where the country is most of the time. We have pockets, of course, but again, in city government, you can lean right or left, but generally speaking, we can kind of agree. So I still do my dead level best to try to keep that heavy partisanship out of it. It doesn't mean there are certain ideals about government that I think are really important and where the boundaries should be and where we should be focused with limited tax dollars, which is usually where it comes down to. There's been plenty of infighting at our own council level that have been thrust upon us, usually because of outside agitation around, frankly, a frustration of who's president right now, right? That's really what it's coming from. I do not like Trump, so I'm going to be really angry and I'm going to come to council meeting every time I can. Mm-hmm. And look, you have the right to do that, but back to my conversation around the book I'm reading, it is performance. It is all about clicks. It's not moving the needle, and it's a total distraction. Just ask city staff, right? So, but Fort Worth, I think largely though, when you look, they still want the same things. Mm-hmm. People that have moved here left a place for a reason, and they want good governance. So that's the most important thing. You've seen a lot of, infighting around party politics in Tarrant County, especially in the last 6 months. Redistricting just added gasoline to the fire,
Totally.
I'll take Congressman Mark Vesey, for instance, who has been a longtime Fort Worth supporter, an excellent congressman, right? Mostly because he was always accessible and really worked for Fort Worth and the needs of our community. And unfortunately, I wasn't consulted about him specifically as a congressman, right? And so drawing his district into Dallas does upset me because I really enjoyed working with him, right? But I'm not going to be able to solve that. And I have had to accept that even when people are pushing me, like, say more, do more, be louder, stand up, that doesn't really help anything. I'm not going to be able to solve it for them. So I have only so much energy to focus as mayor.
It doesn't, but still as mayor, as individual citizens, these things that are happening in Washington, happen in Austin, they affect us. They affect us individually. They affect the city. You mentioned Mark's district. Well, that district, when you looked at it, that ran from Dallas to Fort Worth, it looked more like a rail strip than it did a congressional district.
Yes.
So a whole lot of issues there. Now, I am going to push you, use that as a bridge into it. The administration has taken a very different view in several different areas that all affect Fort Worth.
Sure.
One is trade. With the tariffs, that view. How do you look at those policies relative to what you're accomplishing in Fort Worth?
Well, if you talk to leaders on almost every industry, the uncertainty around trade and tariffs is impacting them. The way it's specifically impacting most of them right now is just, I'm going to hold on to my cash and capital and make different decisions. Now, some caveats to that would be, just recently on Tuesday, we approved a tax incentive deal for Alcon, who is onshoring a few of their manufacturing facilities, and we're in the running to be a placement for one of those, possibly two. And they're pivoting out of need for their own company, but also out of, I just need to mitigate my risk. And so some companies, Alcon is an example of one that's well capitalized and healthy, and so they can kind of pivot around that. But you also have smaller companies, small businesses are hit really hard. Maybe they had goods that were shipping in from other countries that now they have a tariff that's too high. They also wake up the next day and never mind, we're not going to do that anymore. And if you're a small business with 2 employees, you can't really respond to that. So my message to the administration would be, we've got to figure this out. The whack-a-mole doesn't work for any city, Fort Worth included. I appreciate the long-term goal of trying to create fairness and equity around trade and who is in the game and who's not, and which countries are on the chopping block. But the lack of consensus they currently have among the administration and Congress, and frankly the courts now.
The courts is the biggest deal now.
Absolutely, is just so debilitating for business. So I'm hopeful that we have got to figure that out. And I've given that message to anybody that would listen that has an influence.
You also have a city that is a very diverse city.
Yes.
Large percentage Hispanic. The administration has taken a very different view of immigration. Do a compare and contrast of how it's affected your city, the previous administration's policies versus this administration's policies, and how you see this administration progressing.
Well, it really did start. It started in the Biden administration, sure, especially when the border exploded. And you started to see cities specifically when they were moving people from the border into other U.S. cities. Governor Abbott, of course, led on that. Then DeSantis. So it created this conversation, what's going to happen to Fort Worth? Are you a sanctuary city? How's that work? So here's back to what I can and can't control, right? Is I have seen a totally different tone and tenor. I have talked to families. Usually it happens in settings in schools because I am in school so often and so many students are, maybe their parents or grandparents are undocumented or, DACA recipients. I want to get to that in a second. That's a whole nother category of concern, right? Our immigration system has been broken for a very long time. I had the opportunity to meet with President Bush, I guess probably 6 months ago. And we talked about this issue, something he really struggled to try to solve and thought he got close to, right?
He put it down on and everybody walked at the end and he got nowhere.
And so at what point as a country to say, you know what, guys, we probably are going to need to sit in a room and figure this out.
But Mayor, your comment, sit down and do this. Again, this has been around since 1986. That under President Reagan, that was the last one. We don't do that.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the
But
things
it
I
doesn't
look
mean
at,
I can't wish for it or hope for it,
well,
right?
and hope for it. But I think the reality of it is both the Republicans and the Democrats make so much money off of it that there's a real disincentive to sit down at the table
and have a discussion.
and to have that discussion.
Yeah.
The discussion to me is not a long discussion.
Yeah.
Now, will everybody be happy walking out of the room?
No.
But my argument is 80%. Go back to your
Well,
earlier.
when I actually last weekend when I was in Oklahoma City, David Holt asked Senator Langford to come and speak to mayors. And as you all know, he was on probably the 10th yard line recently before Trump was elected. And to your point, it's a great election issue, so it really fell apart.
Yeah.
But Senator Langford, who is so eloquent and very well versed in this topic, he would argue we're going to get there, and it's people like him. Well, it won't. It will not happen before the midterm, and he was given a political calculus, right, that he has better knowledge to.
Sure.
But he is still very hopeful that based on the work he's done with Democrats and Republicans, he feels like he can get there along with that. So what we hope springs
it's
eternal.
right. Just
Sure.
midterm then leads to the presidential election,
But
which
your
leads to
question
the
really is
midterm.
about how does that impact your local community?
Yeah.
It's very disruptive. You don't want any family scared.
Right.
And I wish so badly that I could solve that for someone. I try to be really careful with how I speak about this because the reality is it's not my family that would be impacted, right? I know individuals who have, an uncertain undocumented status. Let's take DACA, for instance, which is mind-blowing to me. I've said this publicly numerous times. Why Congress won't pick that up and make DACA recipients a permanent resident, legal resident, citizen, whatever they want to argue about, fine. But these are people they're amazing individuals adding to our local economies and our communities. They're parents or, they're brothers and sisters, and they are Texans, right? And I think it's really detrimental. So I don't have a silver bullet to solve the problem. But
do you think the administration general direction on immigration, tightening the borders, deporting individuals who are not here illegally, do you agree with that general thrust? And then a sub-question in that is, do you agree with the way that they're implementing the policy?
Sure. So border security, absolutely. And we heard that in droves. I mean, I had the most powerful conversations with border mayors at the height of that who were exasperated. They no longer could run their cities. It was so frightening. On the security standpoint of what trickles into your cities, let's just take fentanyl, for instance. The rhetoric you hear is actually real. Just ask a Fort Worth police officer that focus on fentanyl.
The
right?
fentanyl, absolutely.
Right. So we have to secure our border. You have to have a secure nation state. People do need to get here legally. The ultimate question I think we're really struggling with is what do you do with people that are here without legal status? And do you demarcate people based on how long they've been there? And I think everybody disagrees about that, right? Back to when Bush was president, amnesty became this dirty word. Don't offer amnesty to anybody, right? Well, if you've been here for 30 years and this is your home, is there a legal path to citizenship that we should be working toward, right? If I were in a position of any kind of influence and power, that's what I would be working toward. But I realize that I'm not necessarily in vogue in the Republican Party of people that believe that, right? The other thing I think that's missing in the messaging, and again, we've always had a great working relationship with ICE. Our Fort Worth Police Department does a great job. When it's criminal activity, that's always been our focus. If you have a criminal that's here and they need to be handed over to ICE, we work on that. I think majority of Americans, large majority, believe that. If you're a criminal and here illegally, you need to be deported and through that system. I think the problem right now is there's so much uncertainty about who's being deported and the impacts to that. And I do worry about that, and that degradation of trust in community, especially among our Hispanic residents, is real. And I think right now I don't see an end in sight.
So what's the messaging to that community? Because, there is so much uncertainty. There's also this balance where you've got foreign actors that are exploiting what happened the last 4-8+ years on open border situation. Fentanyl's a huge deal. Crime has become an issue. What's the messaging to the people that may be here with an uncertain kind of immigration status, but want to be here because America is a great place to be and the American dream is still alive and well?
Yeah. Well, I think, frankly, even when the city and the Fort Worth Police Department and other department leaders have worked on messaging, and we have council members, Councilmember Flores and Councilmember Martinez, who obviously are both Hispanic, both speak Spanish, do an excellent job. The hard part is we're not the ones they're concerned about, and so it kind of gets lost in translation from a city level. But we still focus on what really matters is delivering our services to every single resident in our city, working alongside every neighborhood, making sure our community centers are welcoming, our parks, that they have good relationships. Our frontline staff, like I mentioned our neighborhood police officers, they have a heavy burden to make sure they're working alongside people because we want to make sure crime stays down in those areas. Because the other problem is you have people that are predatory and they know where they have a higher volume of undocumented people. Let's go commit crimes there because they're not going to call 911, right? So we've done a great job with that too. And there's a few officers in particular that have an incredible trust in the community. Shout out to Daniel Segura, who's a great officer who really carries a heavy burden there. But I'd be lying if I thought our messaging was right on and was solving the problem, because it won't solve the problem until things really clear up nationally.
The messaging on the other side is important too, though, because as you said, the human trafficking is something that you see it. I had a chance to see it up close, and until I was in the position, never understood it. And it is a humanitarian issue that I don't think anybody in our nation would be proud of.
It's hard to understand the level of evil until you've been faced with it.
Until you get into that. I agree with you. I sat in on courts at 2 a.m. that were designed to address those issues, and it's just heartbreaking. But there's the other part of it from being mayor. With all of the immigration that's come in, undocumented, illegal, whatever term you want to use at it, people are saying, hey, hold it. The laws make a difference. And if somebody's here illegally, they're here illegally. We've got to deal with that. And from your position, that additional population does put pressure on you.
Sure.
More police protection, more welfare services,
healthcare,
more support service, healthcare especially. How do you kind of balance all of those?
Well, most recently, because of a bill that passed this last session, really governor's orders that our healthcare systems need to report out the amount of indigent care they're providing to those that are undocumented. And it's a really high number in Tarrant County. It is across the state of Texas. And I think that is important because as taxpayers, as residents, it's a burden on your local economy, right? And so, as far as I agree with a lot of that concern. I really do, because I've seen it firsthand when you have a limited amount of services that are provided, and now people that are residents here, that are legal citizens, don't have access to something because someone's here legally.
And they're paying for it.
Absolutely. And so the problem is, though, because of this really significant gray area we've created, there's not right now a pathway for someone that says, okay, I'm here illegally. I've been here a long time. I want to come out of the shadow. I want a path. Right now, they're not going to do that because of the fear that's there.
Well, there's not a path either.
And there's no path,
So, right. So back to real compromise, there is going to have to be some type of path, because as I've watched this discussion, the focus to deport everyone that's here illegally is not practical. The number of undocumented people that were in just the state of Texas alone, right? So what does that mean? And where's the demarcation? Those are really complicated questions.
Does that path include right to vote?
Well, honestly, when you talk to some folks that are just here illegally, they just want legal status, which would not include
exactly.
the right
That's
to vote.
My question. Yeah.
Right. They just want to be here with their families. And oftentimes they want to be able to go back and forth, maybe to Mexico to see family or send money home or whatever it is. And so this is something that we've created this mess, and our partisanship has created this mess, and we don't put the right smartest brains in the room that are willing to compromise. And as a result, local cities like Fort Worth and Dallas and Addison and others are left dealing with it.
You've been mayor for 4 years. You've had a lot of successes we've talked about. Very popular within your city and within the region. How much longer are you going to do this?
I don't know. You probably got that question a lot. Well, I guess not, because Fort Worth is unique. We run every 2 years.
You run every 2 years, and you don't have the limitations that other cities do.
Yes. And here's what's funny. Just I was reelected in May, and I think it might have been 3 weeks later, I ran into somebody, and they were like, man, I really like you as mayor. What can I do to help you? When's your next election? I was like, yeah, we just had that.
Yeah.
And
Did you vote?
You missed it. Obviously, you didn't vote. Okay, we'll work on that next time. And then they constantly ask you. I mean, I'm reelected and people immediately start asking me, right? I actually have enjoyed every 2 years because I'm in that stage of life where things are crazy, and I can see my life in 2-year tranches, right? And I also know, having served alongside other elected officials, if I'm chasing to feel like I'm done, I've accomplished it all, that is a goal that will never be achieved. right? As an elected leader of a large
There's always
city.
a to-do
There's
list.
always something to do. And so I need to be focused in the here and now. And as we approach that 2027 election, right, make a decision as to whether or not I want to keep serving. Am I ready for a new chapter? Do I feel like the city is ready for a new leader? Is there other people waiting in the wings that would be great community leaders? Because that's what's kept Fort Worth is we've had great people that are public servants that wanted to do this job.
So let's brainstorm for a second.
Okay.
What would a new chapter look like for Mattie Parker?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be in politics, right? It may be very well in business, in private business. You know, you've run the gauntlet yourself of different elections. So I don't know. I really don't. And I'm so at peace with that I didn't think I'd be mayor of Fort Worth, Texas. I grew up on a cattle ranch that's 1,000 acres in the middle of nowhere with a party line. Seriously, this is an amazing ride I've been on, and I love being the mayor. I'm great at this job. I know my city. I know the policies that are needed. I love working alongside people. I can most days cut out the noise, even on the hardest days, right? Which is really important.
That's critical.
Keep things in perspective. But I am also at peace saying, hey, I have no idea what I'll be doing in 2 or 4 or 6 years from now.
So in 27, 29, whenever it is that Mattie Parker says, okay, I've played Fort Worth mayor out as far as I can. What do you want people to say about your service? And importantly, how do you want them to compare it to some of the other well-respected names of Fort Worth mayors of the past?
Well, I think number one would be a respect for the leadership I've really exhibited over the last 4, at that time, 6 or 8 years as mayor in an incredibly pivotal chapter of our city. With growth and opportunity and a refocusing and Fort Worth really being on the map in the United States for the first time in our history, that I've led with a lot of integrity and pragmatism, and I was respected, and that I had made a lot of people mad along the way, which sometimes I think is actually a good marker of success, right? No one's perfectly happy. They've all gone home with a compromise.
You cannot make everybody happy.
You can't.
Definition of a good deal.
Yes, it is a definition of a good deal. And so that's really what my hope is too. And of course, that a sense that I've generally made sure I've left this place better than I found it. You know?
So any surprise why she's as popular as she is?
You're wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank y'all for the time. We
Mattie
appreciate
Parker,
it.
thanks for
Good to
being
see
with
you.
us.
Thank y'all.
So fun.
Appreciate y'all.